All right, everybody. Now that we're done installing stuff and covering the syllabus, it's time to start getting into material and actually learning how to code. I think it's really important, though, that we kind of take a look at some of our resources and links here at the top of the course. So the first thing I'll say is because we don't have a formal textbook for this course, we will use online resources. So when you guys are going through your modules and your labs, we will have linked up what we feel are important links for material, predominantly coming from this website here, which is called W3 Schools. And I'm going to go ahead and click on this and take you right over to the Python homepage here. But I want to talk about this site as an important tool because it didn't start as a website that was built for like learning how to code regular programming languages. It was built really for HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Right? And so I want to talk about, what W3 is and what it means. W3 is a kind of a acronym hack, I'll call it, where it's three W's, World Wide Web, right? And the organization that puts this website together is called the World Wide Web Consortium, which is the standards issuing body for the internet and all the languages and protocols that operate on the internet. So this organization makes the rules for how web pages operate and how data is transmitted across the internet. And they are basically the proctor of these three languages here, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which we call the three core languages of the internet, right? Now, because a lot of people who create websites also write computer code to drive the websites from behind the scenes, they have all these other languages here. So if you're learning any of these languages, this is really, I'm just kind of putting it on your radar as a coder, an excellent, trustable website for learning how to pick up, coding tips on any of the languages you see on the screen here, and often is used as a reference. And what I very often tell my students, because I'll get a question like this: Ty, how do you remember all this stuff? And here's the simple answer: I don't. Why would you bother to? Right? You think I'm going to go through it and like all these languages that I've learned? Yeah, there's a lot that I've retained in my head, but there's also a lot where it's like, hey, I used it 6 months ago and I forgot the exact syntax. There's no shame in that. You just come to a reference site like this and look it up. That's what pros do all the time, right? So having this kind of like on your speed dial or your bookmarks or whatever in the Python area is very useful. So most of the stuff that we will have here in terms of links for reference materials will come from this website, right? Because we consider it a really good source for the information. I apologize. There are ads on this website. I'm not running an ad blocker on this browser. Long story. Anyhow, I do just want to put that on your radar because it is an important site. The other important site is the Python site that we were already on. So the core URL for the website, but they also have a documentation area that also not only serves as a reference. It's a little bit more technical of a reference though than W3 School. So I'm not in favor for intro people, but when you become experienced, it's very helpful. And there's also tutorials, right? I'm also not a huge fan of the tutorials. That's why the W3 ones is at the top and these are a little bit farther down. But if you got into the flow of working as a pro, those would be your go-to sites, generally speaking. There are others, right? But these are what I would call the core. Right. Let's go back over to the modules page now, and I am going to click here on the first module. But before I dig into writing the code, I do want to give you guys just a little bit of an intro on Python. This will be about as close to a PowerPoint as you guys are going to get, by the way. But we talk about Python as a language, and and you can ask the questions that you see right here on the screen. And I think that this is really nicely laid out. Like, really, what is Python? Python is a programming language that was first established back in the early 90s by this guy named Guido van Rossum, and he did it for very selfish reasons, right? At the time, he was a server admin, right? And he was managing servers, and he wanted to find a way to automate the tasks that he does on the server so he didn't have to sit there and type in a command. So if you guys have ever learned how to run a server, especially from a command line, what's really common is like you type a command and then you press enter and you wait for it to execute. And then you type your next command and then you wait for that to execute. Right. That's great. If the task only takes a few seconds, it's wonderful. You just wait a couple seconds and then type your next command. But what if that command takes a couple hours to process? Then you got to come back later and type the next command to move on to the next step. What a lot of people figured out in the early days of server maintenance is you could write what we call a script file or a batch file, where you would put in a series of commands and then you run the whole thing, and then that waits for it to finish and run the next command. So he originally developed Python as a language to automate his job as a server admin, right? Pretty clever. Came up with his own language rather than use one of the already existing ones that were available. And whatever, so that was where the language originated from. What do we use it for these days? As the list shows, really popular backend web development language. So in other words, when you are on the internet, the stuff that you see on your screen is kind of the result of the code running on a server somewhere, not actually the code itself. So we use it for backends for websites. We use it to write regular software, right? Everything from games to productivity to whatever. We also use it a lot for math. So Python has been built to process really large numbers and do so very elegantly. There's a lot of math libraries. And then we still use it for what we call system scripting. And that's what Guido originally developed it for, was for automating tasks on the server. And it's still used for that. It's very commonly used for that. It says, what can Python do? And I'll let you read that part for yourself. It can do all sorts of stuff. The one thing that's kind of interesting about Python, and I'm just gonna put this on your radar right off the bat. Like when we run software on a computer system, whether we're on a Mac or we're on a PC, we're usually running software that's already converted into what we call a binary file. It's an executable. So for example, if I'm to run a game, I find that game and its exe file. So when I'm clicking like on one of these icons here, like Firefox, for example, I'm actually launching a program probably called firefox.exe. And on modern Windows operating systems and Mac operating systems, we never see that file extension. On a PC, a binary extension is .exe. On a Mac, it's .app, right? But if I was to take one of those files and drop it into a text editor and look at it, and you can do that, by the way, if you don't believe that's possible, you can totally do that. You would see a bunch of gobbledygook that looks like some alien created it. It's not readable. That's by design, right? The reason they do that is so other people can't steal the intellectual property that created that program. The last thing you want to do is put all this work into creating something, publish it, and then have people just copy paste and have it be their own. Right? How are you going to make money off of that? You're not, right? So it becomes sort of like, you can think of an executable file or a binary as kind of a black box where things just kind of disappear into it. It just works. We don't know how, it just works. Python does not work that way. Python does not create natively executable binary files. It is what we call an interpreted language. And this is a really important concept. So when we write code, it never turns into a binary. It's just a set of instructions. And anybody who's coded in JavaScript is the same way. We can execute it on the fly. We can just take the file and run the instructions. We can script it to run a server. But you can always look at the code. It's never hidden. This is kind of an interesting thought. So this is how Python operates. So just kind of keep that in mind. We are in the era right now of Python 3. And it does mention here that there is a Python 2 and it's still used, right? But the syntax is different. We are learning Python 3. When you start to compare Python to other languages, if you already know how to code, you will see some similarities. but it's not exactly like any other language. It is kind of its own unique animal. It shares a lot with JavaScript in terms of its flexibility, however, not its syntax. JavaScript is a lot like Java, where it's got curly brackets and semicolons. Python doesn't use those conventions. Instead, it uses one line of code and indenting to separate its code. And so it makes it scaringly flexible. And sometimes, real frankly, when you start to learn how to code Python, you can just guess at what the syntax might be, and it might be right. You know, and it's okay. If you know how to code in another language, you will see the things right away with the basic conventions and understand them very quickly. If you're brand new, don't freak out. We'll show you those conventions as we go. But it is highly flexible and easy to use. Now, here's the other thing I really like about working with W3 schools when you're learning languages. They have these little tools built in, and I encourage you guys to try these, by the way, called the try it yourself tool, right? So if you click this button, they show you the code on the right. This looks a lot like Code Sculptor, doesn't it? Right? The codes, or excuse me, the code's on the left, and then you have this little run button and your output windows on the right. So for example, they have your like default first message, which is hello world. You know, I'm sitting in the city of Milwaukee here, so I'm going to say hello Milwaukee. I'm just going to tweak it and just hit run. Somewhere on their server, it's processing it and it pushes it back to my browser. What's beautiful about this is if I'm learning about the language, I want to try out the concept and experiment with it without installing software or going to an IDE. Here it is. So it serves both as a reference and a testing tool. And you know what? Even as a professional coder, and I see pros doing this all the time, they come to this site and try stuff and look stuff up. Excellent resource in a lot of ways. Okay, so if that's not clear, it should be now. Now we're going to drive over to the modules, and I want to actually start doing some of this stuff by just doing it, right? And the lecture is going to be kind of peppered in with the coding. So the first thing I need you guys to do, and I know you probably have your IDEs up and running already, but I'm going to have you first actually I'm going to close my Anaconda here, is I want you to go to a file folder and start with file management. So I do this to all my intro level students, and I apologize if you feel that this is insulting, but I feel that one of the most important skills in IT is learning how to manage your files. And what happens, or what's happened, I should say, in the last 10, 20 years, the Mac OS is guilty of this, and the Windows OS is guilty of this. They've dumbed down our operating system. So when you're using a computer, and let's say you go into Microsoft Word or Excel and you create a file and you hit save, it's like, where did that go? I'm not sure. That's okay. The computer knows, right? And so it's like, you know, it becomes easy to locate, you know, either from your recent file list or from the recent file list of the software that you're using. I'm going to tell you, as an IT professional, that is unacceptable for IT professionals to not know where their files are at. You know, it's kind of like a race car driver not knowing how to drive stick. I mean, it's kind of a given that you have to drive stick as a race car driver. So what I would encourage you to do is somewhere on your hard drive or your cloud storage, whatever you prefer, create a folder. And what I did on my machine is I just created a WCTC folder. Inside that folder, I created a folder for this class. And then inside that folder, I will create a folder for every bit of work I do. And you can see I created one here for the module 1 labs, which we're about to do. So I have a spot to put my files before I start. Seems kind of backwards to start with file management. I assure you it's not. Another tip I will give you, and this is a strong recommendation, not a requirement, is if you're in Windows 11 and you have your File Explorer tool up on the screen, go to your options here. You notice the little dot in the toolbar. If you're in Windows 10, if you have the ribbon bar active, you can kind of do this with a couple of button clicks, but they also have a options menu somewhere in one of the menus. I think it's under tools, I believe. You bring up this panel here, And then you will go to the view menu. You guys don't remember, you don't have to do this step. I'm just kind of pointing it out. The little thing that we're looking for is this little entry right here that says hide extensions for known file types. And that's by default turned on. I want you to see this Python file I have stored here. Watch what happens to it when I click that button and hit apply. The file extension, the .py at the end of the file goes away. And then the only indicator that I have that it's a Python file, well, here I'm in detailed view, so I can see it's a Python file, right? It's kind of like what icon it's using, right? Not recommended. IT pros, and I'm just saying, I'm not trying to be condescending about it, need to know their file extensions. So I recommend that you uncheck that and apply it to your whole darn operating system. Yeah, even on a Mac, I would do that. And I do on my Macs. I like to see my file extensions. IT pros need to be in the know. You should be one of those people, right? You want to make big money? You need to know your file extensions, right? You should also try to find some methodology for storing your files logically, whatever that happens to be. You use a cloud service like Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox, whatever. That's fine. I'm putting my stuff on my local hard drive here. I often replicate it to the Google Drive is probably my more preferred tool, although I like Dropbox better, but that one's not free. All right. So now that you have that folder structure in place, we can go back to Visual Studio Code. And if you have that extension panels open here, you can collapse it down by clicking on the sidebar here. If you have the welcome screen open, you can click the tab and close it. So inside this product, we are going to once again start with file management. This is maybe a little cumbersome because it's like, I thought we were going to code. It's like, nope, you got to know where your files are first. In the left sidebar here in Visual Studio Code, they have this little tool called Explorer. And I want you to click on that. And you'll notice that I'm already attached to the folder I created. But if you're not, come up here and go open folder and navigate to the folder you want to be in. And right now, I guess I'm in the WCTC folder. I really probably should be inside the Python. I named it Spring 24 Term 2, if you guys are curious, right? And then I'm selecting that folder as my workspace. Notice that I have my module 1 labs folder here. It is empty, and I'm clicking the little arrow and nothing's showing up there, but that's where I want to put my stuff for the module 1 labs. Now that I'm in the right place, right? I've created my folders. I'm in the right place inside of Visual Studio Code. We're going to go ahead and create a new file. A number of different ways to do that, and you can learn the shortcut keys ultimately. But a safe first way to proceed is just simply to go up to the File menu and create a new file. Right? And this will be our first foray into coding. So let's just do something really simple. Maybe let's just call one called, or create one called hello.py.
Can you wait 2 seconds? I just want to make sure I'm there because right now I have just a blank screen on top.
Okay, I will pause momentarily.
Okay, because I don't even have like the file across the top.
Okay, you know what? Maybe, Darla, maybe we'll share screens and take a look really quick. I'm going to pause. All right, so just to kind of reiterate these steps here, and I started doing this without recording, so I apologize. So we're going to come up to the File menu. We're going to choose New File. I'm going to name it. I'm just going to say hello.py. I'm going to press enter. It brings up the system save dialog, and then you want to put it in the right place. So I am putting it in my WCTC Python Spring 24 module 1 labs folder. And this is just kind of my first foray into coding. I'm calling it hello for a reason. And it's hello.py. So that's the standard extension for Python files is .py. And then just hit create file, and there it is. Whew, that was challenging, right? Yeah, I assure you that's that's about as easy as it's going to get you. But that's okay. I mean, learning how to do this, there's more than one way to do this, by the way, but this is kind of how I do it, right? And so the first command we're going to try, by the way, is we're going to use a function. It's a built-in function called print. And you see all lowercase letters. And you know what? I will zoom in here a little bit for you guys. Maybe that's a little too much. So I type the print in all lowercase. I put in a set of parentheses, and then inside the parentheses, a set of double quotes. You will notice I didn't type both of them. I typed the first double quote. It put in the second one automatically, right? That's one of the reasons why we use an IDE, because if I forgot to put in the closing one, it would be broken technically. So like if I did this, see what happens? The code's already broken. It underlines red, right? So a good IDE often will complete, like if you put in an opening parentheses, it puts in the closing one automatically. Why? So you don't forget, right? And that's considered a feature, by the way. Old coders like myself had a really hard time getting used to that because we got in the habit of learning how to do that ourselves, right? And then we come with all these fancy modern tools, and it closes for you. It's like, yeah, you go with it, right? You let the tool help you not make a mistake. Inside the double quotes, we're just going to type in, typically what you're supposed to do is say hello world. It's like the first, program you're supposed to do, but you can type in anything you want. And like I did before, I'm going to say hello Milwaukee. All right. The other thing you'll notice here in Visual Studio is as I'm creating my code in the tab that I have, there's a circle that appears, and I don't know if you guys can see that really clearly. And I'm going to actually turn on my highlight tool here. Oh gosh, where did they go with it? Anyhow, I think this is it. Nope. There we go. So you can see my pointer a little bit better. But this little circle up here, when it's like sitting like that, that's an indicator that your file is not yet saved. Okay. So if you want to save it, you can go to the file menu and hit save. That would be one way to do it. If you're working on a bunch of files together, you can hit save all. Caution with that one though. Or if you're just sitting inside the program, my default way, I don't even think about it typically, is I just do control, I hold down the control key with my pinky and then hit the letter S, control S to save. And often when I'm like coding, I'll just say that out loud. I'll type a bunch of stuff, control S to save. Why? I don't want to lose it, right? Here's kind of the beautiful thing about Visual Studio Code though, and I'm just gonna type, I didn't save, I just typed in some spaces and I didn't save it. And then I hit the X. Did you guys notice? Hold on a second. It didn't even ask me to save it. Yeah, well, here's one of the secret sauces of Visual Studio Code and a lot of IDEs. It already saved it in unsaved mode. Isn't that kind of cool? Right. And so this isn't the only product that does this. So sometimes you forget to save, fret not, it already saved it anyhow. So that's kind of a nice feature. It is technically, it isn't written to the file though, but it's inside Visual Studio Code. So I still need to do control S to save. Now to run the program, if you got the plugins installed correctly, you'll see a little button up here that looks like a play button. And you can hit that button. It will launch the internal console, as we call it, which is a little panel. It will run the code and show you the output, and it looks like I misspelled Milwaukee, for shame, for shame. That's what happens when you're talking while you're coding. But this is the output, right? So we were able to tell it to print to the console, use parentheses, double quotes, and just some plain text to drop it in there. And I know this is very, very rudimentary, but the question I have is, can everybody at least do this?
Yes.
Is there anybody not able to do this? All right, that's a good sign, by the way. All right, so that was just kind of our most primitive example, and you can experiment with this to your heart's content. If you want to do multiple print statements, you just take yourself to the next line and start printing, and you can go whatever. It's one of my favorite things to put in code, by the way. Or some people might also ask, hey, can I use single quotes instead? And I'll say, sure. And what if I just did a print command and didn't put anything inside of it at all? What would happen then? Well, let's see. can't even spell it. All right. All right. So here's an example. I added a bunch of print statements, double quotes, single quotes, a blank one. What happens? All right. Here's what happens. Hello, Milwaukee, whatever, sure, a blank line, and well, let's see. Right. So it doesn't care if I use single quotes or double quotes to do the print statement. There's a reason for that, right? Because there might be situations where like you want to put double quotes inside of the thing that you're putting to the screen, or single quotes or whatever, right? So that's why they allow for both. The blank print statement is also useful because sometimes, you know, and I tell this to a lot of coders, right? Everybody fears like space on the screen. There's nothing wrong with adding a little space to your program, if only to make it look nicer in the output console, right? It helps your user see it. Now, granted, if a user was running this program, they wouldn't see it like this, but you still want even a console program to look nice, right? Yeah, I think so. All right, so this is our test program. This is not part of the lab, but hopefully you guys are trying some of this out. Now let's go over to the module and let's try to let's try to follow through. I'm gonna click myself all the way out. We're gonna go to the input and output lab, and there's a couple things here that they start highlighting. And the first one is comments. Okay, so we learned how to do the print command, which is very helpful, right? Because ultimately, whenever you write code, your user wants to see that something's happening. In a console program or command line program, the print is the way that we get the stuff to the console. So first, let's go ahead and take a look at the documentation on this. And you'll notice here at W3 Schools, they talk about, you know, not the print command, but this portion of it, which is a comment. And you notice what makes a comment unique here is this would be non-executing code, but we can add information to our code. So when we look at it later, we know what's going on. Right? Now, I tend not to do this. I know that, you know, I borrowed this course from Patrick, and those of you that know Patrick probably does this in all of his courses, but I think he requires that at the top of every program, that in the form of a comment, you include your name, right? Maybe the name of the course, maybe the date, you know, today is 3/25/24, maybe the name of the assignment, something like that, you know. Now I'm just going to put this up front. I know all the assignments have this included. I really kind of don't care. I hate to be so like, you know, unofficial about it. I really kind of don't care if you put this in or not. However, you can make this actually very useful for yourself because, you know, if you come back and look at this later, how do you know what it is? What if you didn't name the file in a way that made sense? All right. Well, the first thing I noticed is, wait, I'm doing this in the hello Pi file and not in module 1 lab 1 file, right? So why don't I, just for the sake of it, I'm going to do a save as on this one and save it as, and I'm going to do an abbreviation. I'm just going to say mod 1 lab 1 .py. I know that's very hard to see. That's why I'm saying it out loud. But that's a naming convention that makes sense to me. It's inside my module 1 labs folder, and I'm saving it. So now these comments make sense, right? So I'm kind of, you know, labeling it. When I hit the run button, by the way, it has no effect at what comes out on the screen. That's kind of the grand takeaway here, right? This is just information. We call these comments. Programmers that are intelligent throw this stuff into their code, so when they look at it later, they know what the heck they were doing. What I often would do is I would leave like really detailed instructions in here for myself. Like if I knew I was going to step away for a week and then come back, man, your memory fades quick. You know, you forget quickly about what you're doing. Comments can really help you a lot. The other thing that you can do is you might label individual pieces of code so that you know what you were doing last or what you were looking at last last time you were there. And I'm looking at right now at like one of Patrick's examples actually here on my other screen, which he gave me all of his solution files. Not like I need him for this, but it's always interesting to see how others proceed. And yeah, so he did the same thing. He put his name and his date and the class all up at the top. The other point of these comments, by the way, is like you can have them occupy a whole line. And you notice that because this character is at the beginning of the line, that's what turns it into a comment, right? Everything that follows that character will not be executed. But what if I do that on a line where there's already code? Like it works here as well. But anything that follows that pound sign will functionally be ignored as executable. However, it might be useful to put that comment at the end of a line too. Give that a try. And then to make sure it worked, hit the run button. Now you'll notice I never saved my file. So when I hit run, watch what happens to that circle. When I hit run, it saves it automatically, by the way. So that's kind of a helpful little tip too. You will notice none of that stuff appears in the console as output. So that's the first piece. Now we're going to try something else. So I'm going to actually zoom out a little bit here. And I'm trying to get to a point where I can get enough on the screen, but have it still be readable. Hopefully this is not too small for anybody. What I'm going to do is I'm going to blow away most of these print statements here. I'm going to keep the first one. The blank line is always kind of a nice one. And I'm going to come down here, and the next thing that we are supposed to learn is grab some input from the user. And notice I'm labeling it before I do it because I think it's helpful to describe what you're doing when you look back at it. And basically, Python has a number of built-in functions. And the general function for grabbing input from the user, and I'm actually going to type it up here in the comment, is the input function, which looks like this. It's just input in a set of parentheses. But here it is in usage. So if I type input, well, I need to prompt my user what I want them to input. So this is called a prompt. I'll say, what is your name? So, and I'm going to leave a space at the end of it on purpose, maybe even a couple if you want. Some people even go farther and maybe do something like that, or put in a colon, or whatever you think looks really, geeky or whatever. But here's a problem with the input command. I'm going to put this up on the screen, just like a print command does, and it's asking the user to type something. So they'll type in something at the keyboard and press enter. The moment they press enter, that information needs somewhere to go. So at the same time, we need to create a variable. And so I'm just going to create one called username. And notice I used an underscore there. I don't need to put the underscore in there. In fact, you know what? I'm just going to show you. There's so many different ways to do this. There's no rules. You can use an underscore to separate the logical words, or you can use a capital letter. I tend to prefer this approach. This is called camel casing, by the way. We don't start with a capital letter, but we use a capital letter on each logical word of a variable name as we build it. Why? It just makes it easier to read. Do I have to do it that way? No. It's not a rule. It's what we call a convention. So whenever you are working with a language, there will be rules that you must follow, otherwise it doesn't work, or conventions, which are just what people do because that's how we do it. And so we're learning two things here. So we're learning how to grab input from the user and, you see I have my caps lock, and store in a variable called username. And I'm doing this, I'm putting the comments in, so if you guys are doing the same thing, you can, have some recollection of why they do that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do one more command here. And that is output what we got the user. So I'm describing what I'm doing before I do it. We're going to use the print command to do that. And what I'm going to do is, I'm going to do this in a couple different formats now, so please bear with me on this. I'll say welcome, comma, and then following that double quote, I'm going to put in another comma and then type username, like so. Now, the thing that's really weird about Python, and I'm going to say this to anybody that already knows how to code predominantly, is Python has so many different ways to do things that sometimes you just try it and it just works, right? But when I teach my intro level classes, this is the first way I teach them how to intermix what we call a string or text output with the contents of a variable. So I'm going to run this and you'll see what happens here. So watch the console down below. I'll do Control S to save. I'm going to hit run and it's prompting me. And notice I got to click into that panel down below to type, right, to make the panel active. And now I'm just going to type in my name and then I'm going to press enter. Okay. And what it did is it captured my name, right? It captured it here. It stored it here. And then it output it here. This output format is one of several ways we can do the output. I'm gonna build this up incrementally for you guys. And I'll say the most basic text output. And we can intermingle regular text with a variable and then use a comma here to join the two together. The process of joining those together is called, and I'm going to put this in here, concatenation. And I'm not sure if I'm spelling it right. But that's, you know, that equals joining text together. Joining text is enough, right? But that process is called concatenation. That's one way to do it. Another way to do this, and I'm going to go to the next line here. I'll type the print command again. So I'm just going to repeat this. And I'm going to say welcome. And what most of you might be used to from a different language is you do your text, close your double quotes, and then you put in a plus sign, and then your variable name like this. So if you know how to code in a different language, this would look really familiar, right? And I'll say approach number 2, also concat, I'm going to abbreviate concat for concatenation, right? I'll run it again. Click into the panel down here. I'm going to type. Yes, it's nonsense. I get it, but whatever. But it did capture it. And both of them output it. But notice there's a difference. The first approach, where we use the comma, automatically added a space after this, right? And you know, I mean, I didn't put in the comma there, but the second one did it verbatim. It didn't insert a space. I actually need to put a space here to get the space to appear with the second approach. So watch again. Run. I'll just type, you know, whatever, ASDF, and see the combination, right? Okay, not to confuse things, but there's a third way, right? And I'm going to tell you that this is one that I'm strongly recommending that my students do. And I know that Patrick has it in the materials a little bit farther down, but we call this string interpolation, or some people call it F string, but you put the letter F as the first character inside the print statement. And for those of you that have done C#, in C#, we kind of do the same thing with string interpolation. So this will be, we don't use the letter F there, we use a different character, but you type your message like you normally would. So I would say welcome, comma, space. And then instead of putting the variable name outside the double quotes, I put it inside, but inside a pair of curly brackets, right? Those are right above your enter key, basically, as a shift of the square brackets. And then I add the variable name here to do the output. So notice that that approach and how that looks different. Okay, so I'm going to label this as string interpolation. Fancy term, right? Want to impress your coding friends, throw that phrase at them. And allows direct insertion of a variable into text. I'm going to call this probably the most modern approach, and I think for many modern Python programmers, the preferred approach when dealing with data. The why is pretty simple because you're not like putting this outside of the double quotes and then worrying about the plus sign or the comma or in the spaces. You're just putting it right in there. The curly brackets don't appear. It just grabs the variable content and drops it in here. Kind of ramp up this example a little further. This isn't exactly what's called for here, but so we put this stuff on the screen, right? Let's add a blank print command to give space, and then let's prompt our user one more time. And this time we're going to create a variable called user age, right? And we're going to prompt again, and this time we'll prompt and say, how old are you? So we're capturing that. So we're getting input from the user, storing it here. Then let's output that. And you can use any of the approaches I showed above. I'm going to go right to the F string thing. So I'm just going to print out print. Oh gosh, let's think of a creative message. Let's start with the letter F and the double quotes. And then inside there, right away with curly brackets, I'm going to put in username, spelled correctly. And I want you to notice what Visual Studio does here as I'm typing. I was typing incorrectly, but it's recognizing, hey, you have a variable called username. You see it on this list here. And that's to help you finish the typing. If it highlights the right one, you can actually just press enter and it'll fill it in for you, right? Don't resist the power of the force. You go with that stuff, by the way, right? And seasoned programmers get that, right? Because anything you do to like save your typing and get it accurate. And in the old days, I used to think it was cheating to have IntelliSense fill it in for me. And then I started to rethink it and go, you know what? This is keeping me from making mistakes. That's why it's the right thing to do. It's not cheating. That's the correct way, right? It's like, why do you drive automatic transmission? So you don't have to learn how to shift, right? Plus it puts you in the right gear when you need to be. Right. So I'm going to say username is user age years old. So now we're prompting for another piece of information, and now we're going to output both variables, username and user age, right? So here goes. Hitting the run button, watch the console below. What is your name? I don't know. Let's have fun with it, right? Darth Vader. Welcome, Darth Vader, Darth Vader, Darth Vader. Right. How old are you? I'm 123. Right? Darth Vader is 123 years old. Right, so this is an example of grabbing input from the user, storing it into variables, and then outputting it back to the screen. This seems very simplistic, it is, but really powerful stuff, right? Right off the bat, right? All right, I'm going to go back to the module here, if I can find it on like 50 million screens I have going. All right, so we did the input, store data using variables. Let's go look at that documentation really quick. And what I want to show you here is we kind of did a combination of this, and I'm not sure if you guys picked up on it, but I can set up variables basically in this fashion. So I don't have to use an input statement to get a variable. So I can actually hard code them in, and you'll notice here, there's a mix. X is equal to 5. So here's, once again, terminology. This equal sign, when you're programming, you're going to change your mindset. You're no longer going to call it an equal sign. Instead, you will call it an assignment operator, right? And follow my line of thinking here. With an assignment operator, what you're saying is anything on the right side of that operator, the number 5, is getting stored in the item on the left, right? We are not saying x equals 5. We are saying x, which is a spot in computer memory, will store the numeric value of 5. That's really what we're saying. So when we set up a variable, what we're doing is we're allocating memory. And I want you to think about that. That's kind of a thing, right? Like when we run software, software occupies memory. The more memory it occupies, the more we constrain our computer resources. So how you allocate variables actually becomes very important. And it is possible to write software that's using up all your system memory inefficiently. That's not good, by the way, right? So we have to think about that, you know, where we're storing it, what we're storing. What can you store in a variable? Okay, here's a weird thing in Python. Anything, right? On a base level, we store numbers, either counting numbers like integers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or floating point numbers like 2.57, right? Or what we call a string, and a string is basically a series of characters, usually letters, but that can include numbers too. If they're inside double quotes, they're characters. If there's no double quotes, it's a number. Okay, but keep this principle in mind. The thing on the right side of the equal sign is stored in the object on the left. What can be stored there? Typically numbers or strings, but it can actually be complex objects as well. And Python handles it all super elegantly. And so this is a really simple example of storing, you know, variables that are either numeric or text, and then being able to output them and access them, right? But that equal sign is an assignment operator. If you want to give that a try in your code, let's give it a try. We can hard code x equals 5, right? We can also say name equals whatever. Yeah, sometimes I struggle for clever things to put in there. So, and then you can print out each one of those things. In fact, you can even do it in one statement, right? I can print out, for example, with the F string thing, whatever, and X. I can do it like that. So watch the output again. And here's the, oh, I gotta type this stuff in. How old are you? 23. And then we got an error message. And what happened here? You guys see how blind, you guys probably typed in the same exact thing and you're going, Ty made a mistake. Sometimes I do this very consciously. I make mistakes on purpose, because what really just happened, it gave me an error message. My program crashed because I have an error. What happened is, here I'm trying to output this variable, but I didn't output it by its given name, which is name, which stores whatever. I treated whatever as the variable name, which is not correct. What I really should have had here is name. So once again, output, what is your name? Whatever. How old are you? I'm 34. Whatever, and 5, right? So this code is kind of sitting a little bit independently of the other stuff. Another thing that you can do, I'm just, once again, putting it on your radar, it is possible to directly print a variable in a print statement, even if it's a number. So I can just print X directly, and I could just print name directly without worrying about double quotes or anything. And this is what we call brute force, getting it on the screen. And guess what happens? It works. And this is, you know, kind of like what I was alluding to before with Python. You can try something and it works a lot of the times just by guessing. So a lot of flexibility And it really depends on what your goal is for your output, which approach you use. All right. A couple other things we're going to throw in here, and then we'll take a break because I know that we're kind of a little bit delayed on that. But I want to talk about a couple of other goofy little things. One is going to be what we call the length function. I'm going to show you how this works. When we're putting text on the screen, so in the form of a word, really what we're doing, and I have you kind of ideate this as a thought, right? Like if I'm putting the word whatever on the screen, really what it is, it's not a singular thing, really. It's actually what we call a collection of characters, right? So each one of the letters inside that word is an individual separate entity, but together they act as one thing, right? And this has a certain size or shape. In fact, it has length, right? And how long is the word whatever? It's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 characters. So the length of whatever is 8. This is kind of a really weird concept, but I'm going to show you here with stuff that we already have kind of in our queue. I'm going to put together a print statement. I'm going to say your name is, I'm going to use the old school concatenation approach here for a reason. You'll see why. I'm going to run the length function, and inside the parentheses for length, I'm going to put in name, right? So what that's going to return is a number indicating the length of name. And then I'm going to output this, and I'm going to say letters long. Now, I'm just kind of giving you a heads up on this. This is probably going to fail. I'm going to do Control S. If you're following along, you can verify it with me. And so the first parts of this will work. So we'll, Snoopy, how old are you? 2, right? And then it failed. It got to that point and the code crashed. And notice what it's doing here is it's pointing to this spot. This is Python's way of telling you where your error is. This little arrow right here. It's saying you got a problem right here. And what it's telling me really is you're trying to join strings together, but now you're throwing a number in the middle. That doesn't work in this format, so there's a fix to it. And we have another function, the str function or string function, which converts things to text for output. So that's sometimes a consideration. So what I would do here is I would take the str and wrap it around that number. So that's going to produce a number. This will convert that number to text and allow me to put it on the screen. Watch the difference. Right? What's your name? Whatever. Old are you? 3. All right. And there it is. And I needed to add a space here, but notice how this one worked. If I was to use this approach, the comma approach, and I said basically the same thing. I said, what was the message? Your name is, and then I do the comma approach. Then I should be able to do length name, and then a comma, and then back to text, years old. And once again, I'm doing this for the sake of comparison, so you see the different approaches and kind of get comfortable with them. Yeah, and I am dropping in nonsense text here just to get it to run. But notice how this approach, I didn't have to use the string function to convert it. So one of the reasons why, this is maybe considered the default approach is you don't have to worry about that conversion. It happens automatically. If I wanted to use the F string approach, I would do it like this. Your name is name. Oh, but we're looking for the length of name, right? How do you do that? Well, let's see if we can put the function inside here. The length of that work. So here's where we get a little bit experimental. So, you know what? And that's not the right thing. It should be letters long. Sorry, makes no sense. All right. All right. Until we need a break. So I'm about to go into a break, folks. If you guys are need to go to the bathroom or something. There it is. Run it again. See how the three different approaches compared. Right. Here's what we'll do. I'm gonna pause the video. We'll take a break. We'll come back. We're gonna add one other little piece to this, and then we'll move on to the next lab. All right. All right, folks. I'll see you in about 5 minutes. This video will be paused for the moment. Just want to let you guys know I am sitting here if you need anything, questions, or stuck. Just want to chat.
One question has nothing to do with the actual assignment, but I was looking at Canvas. So where I'm confused where we're supposed to be submitting assignments, because you have this thing about lab submissions link in this module to submit all of the labs together. So I'm confused where you want us to submit this.
Yeah, Cody, that's a good question. Let's wait till everybody comes back.
Okay.
I'm gonna do a little.
I don't want to get ahead of myself, but I also want to make sure it gets addressed.
Yeah, and basically, I'm piggybacking off of the way Patrick's doing it. This is not normally how I would do it.
Yeah, well,
he does
not
all
how
the labs.
any Canvas class I've been in has done it.
Yeah, everybody's got their own style. I'm trying to follow with what happens here. But generally what we do is with the lab assignments, we do all of them and then we submit them all together with one submission.
Cool.
Where the assignment is done separately. I'll show you that in a second, basically.
Okay.
Let me,
Oh, yeah,
in fact, I can, if you come back to your modules here,
Yeah,
basically,
I'm,
like
I'm,
you do
I'm
all three of
seeing it
them.
now.
Yeah.
It's all
Right.
down at the bottom. Which
And,
is,
and if you click on this one, there's nothing, there's no instructions here. It's
right.
just, yeah.
All the labs are one assignment, kind of.
Yes.
The labs that we're doing in class.
The labs that we're doing in class are basically one assignment. Yes.
Perfect. Okay.
Not too difficult, right, Cody? I mean,
Yeah. It's just a little different, and I was a little confused.
no problem.
It's nothing massive.
Folks, in the interest of like trying to get as much done as we can here, I am gonna step forward. Now, the one thing that I'm gonna point out here, I'm gonna hit record in just a second, is we are kind of moving through this input and output thing, and we just did this convert a number to a string, right? And why do you do that? So you can basically output a number correctly or use it as text as opposed to being a value. And we're going to do a lot more of this as we go. This is not like a huge part of this, but we did a little bit of that here, right? So there are these situations where sometimes you have to convert from one format to another. Python generally doesn't care about data types, so to speak, but it also kind of does. And it's a matter of learning when to leverage those. All right. And if that makes no sense right now, don't worry about it. It will become clear as we move forward. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hit the record button here in the interest of time so we can keep moving. And the thing that I think maybe I did is maybe I unpaused the recording before I didn't even realize it, or maybe I never paused it. So maybe I have to do a little YouTube editing, whatever, not a big deal. We have a couple other little topics to cover for this first exercise, and that is these things that we call string methods. And basically, when you're working with strings, which are a series of characters, you have all these functions that you can use. And I want you to notice there's a whole bunch of them. And I'm going to guess that this is even the complete list that you can apply to strings. There's a couple of real basic ones, though, that I think are pretty useful. And I'm going to do them in a really brute force manner here. And you guys can just kind of either copy or try to type them in as fast as you can, one way or the other. But when we refer to functions, like we've learned that like the print command is a function, and we recognize it typically because it's got a word and then parentheses after it. That's how we know. Functions also can be called methods, right? So I'm going to just put this thing on here. Functions can also be called methods. And when does that happen? When they are part of a larger object. And this is kind of a confusing concept when you don't know what an object is. But the point is, a method is usually attached to something else. And when we're using a function that's attached to something else, we call it a method. There are some methods that are really commonly used when we work with text. And I'm trying to do this, like I said, in an efficient way. And I'm trying to copy paste, but my other screen, whatever, long story. I'm just typing it. This is how it goes. But we have this username that we've been using, right, which is text, right? It's a variable that holds text. And we have these really commonly used string functions. One's upper. And then I'm just going to copy and paste this so you guys can see what they all do. Another one's called lower. And then we have another one called capitalize. Gotta spell it right though. And you know what? Notice how I'm going to let the IntelliSense do it for me. I'm just going to press enter there. So it fills it in automatically. Now, what this is going to do, it's going to take whatever name we prompt from the user. The first one will make it all uppercase. The second will make it all lowercase. And the last one will make sure the first letter is a capital, even if it wasn't originally. Here comes the run. And let's get the console pulled up here a little bit. So what is your name? George. How old are you? 11. Did all the stuff, but notice upper, change it to all uppercase. Lower, forced everything to lowercase, even though I had typed in a capital G. And then this, if I hadn't typed in a capital G, would force the G to be capital. Right? Now, these are, okay, you got like, why is this useful? Here's the why it's useful. Can you imagine if you were doing a login and your username was case sensitive, right? And this is actually kind of the secret sauce of like most email addresses and domain accounts, by the way. Most of them are either one case or the other, and generally lowercase is the thing. But it makes it easier when you're running code to only have to look for one thing instead of two things, right? So if somebody types their username and their caps lock is on, well, you can convert it to lowercase for comparison or vice versa, right? So very useful in that regard. The capitalized one works pretty nicely if somebody doesn't know how to use like the shift key or whatever, that does happen, where you can force stuff to be capitalized correctly. These are just formatting commands. I do want to kind of circle back to the module 1 lab here. And, you know, we did all this stuff. We didn't do it exactly the same way. Okay, but I'm going to call this one done. So if you did it the same way I did it, we're good. Okay, so you can see I'm kind of not necessarily following the rule book here. If you happen to do it exactly like this, more power to you. If not, the way I did it, even with all the trials and errors and changes, great. Right? That's absolutely fine. I do want you to notice, and Cody was pointing out, it says, you know, hey, where do you submit your work? And it says, do not submit your homework here. Use the lab submission link in the module to submit all the labs together. Meaning, back here in the modules tab, when we finish these other 2 labs, we will take those and submit them all at once to this link. I'm going to show you the first step of how to do that. So I'm going to stop this video first. So that video is done. At least I thought it was done. Video to stop. I'm laughing about it, but it's not actually funny. All right. Let me see if I can keyboard shortcut stop it.